and welcome to Most Recent Save, the podcast where we talk to influential voices in games and pop culture about the pivotal moments, challenges, and triumphs that shape their lives and careers. It is a journey through the pathways of life where the focus is not just on the destination, but the stories that shape the journey in between the save points. I am your host, Dr. Rachel Cowart. Today, we are joined by Professor Constance Steinkuhler. Now, here's when I usually give a short bio, but I realized I forgot Constance to ask her to give me a bio. So what I did is I went to ChatGPT and I said, "Who is Constance Steinkuhler?" And this is what it gave me. She is a prominent figure in the field of video game research and academia. She is known for her work on the cognitive aspects of gaming. She served as a senior policy analyst under the Obama administration in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where she focused on digital media and learning initiatives. She has also been a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she researched the effects of video games on learning and behavior. Her work has contributed significantly to our understanding of the positive impacts of gaming on education and social interaction. Now, not bad. It failed to mention she's currently a professor at UC Irvine in the Department of Informatics, and also failed to mention that she is one of my academic heroes. When I was trying to figure out
Oh,
what to do with my life, there were only a handful of people that were studying games, and she was one of them. So I was a fan before she even knew I was alive, and now here she is on my podcast. Welcome.
Rachel, you're my new bestie. So
Oh, kindred
yeah,
spirits.
that's great. What ChatGPT thinks of me. You know, it gets about 85% true, and the rest of it, it's just a bunch of bullshit. Can I say that on the
No.
podcast?
Yes, you can say
Did I
that.
just?
No, you can
Okay.
say that. We're all friends here. This show is all about the journey. And I
Love.
know that where you are now, you are a proper fixture in the field of game studies. You're a trailblazer in the field of games and learning, but also games and extremism, which is something we share. But we want to talk it back to the beginning. So we're going to go
Mhm.
back to childhood Constance. And
Mhm.
I'd love to hear a bit about where you grew up and if you played games as a kid and what kind of role did that have in your life as a youngin'.
I love that you asked this question. No, I grew up in Jefferson City, Missouri, which is the capital of Missouri. It's where, it's kind of where the grand adventure of Lewis and Clark sort of broke oars and realized this shit's going to be super hard. It is a city that is mostly conservative. It's beautiful. It's a little river town. Everyone has manicured lawns. And yet, it's also a place that when I grew up in like the 70s and 80s, if you were even slightly different, it was pretty dangerous. Um, so you did a lot of work to fit in at that time. And I think times have changed, but I don't know that it's changed as much everywhere. So I kind of left at 17 and never went back. But to answer your question, when the Atari 2600 came out, I was what, 7 years old, barely. And I can remember it being in a household or two, but my home, I was raised by very austere, serious Germans, and went to Catholic schools that were also like full of discipline. So I think about this a lot because I think that probably the thing that keeps me in the discipline of looking at games is less games and more play generally because I don't think play was ever seen as something that was valued or there wasn't a lot of space held for that. And so when I became a mom, that shifted. I used my kids as an excuse to sort of create my own space for play. But by the time I graduated high school, I was a kill your television person. I didn't have TV. I looked down on pop culture. I had 3 degrees in mathematics and literature and religious studies and was very serious with a capital S. And then somewhere in grad school, actually, so when I was in grad school, I was working on. You're gonna laugh out loud at this one. So the internet was just passing 50% in American households. It was just becoming kind of a thing that was not just for like the tech aficionados. And I was very interested in sort of people's reasoning in groups online. So I was doing work around argumentative reasoning and problem solving in groups. And so my master's study of all things was an experiment comparing three different conditions, one of which, the experimental, the big one, was talking to strangers about controversial issues. And I was looking at
You're right.
my right? I know, right? So my hypothesis was that, well, obviously, talking to strangers online about controversial issues would improve your reasoning. And so I was looking at, sort of doing these sort of random assignments, like control, like whether or not you agreed versus disagreed on the issue. And in a nutshell, the results were surprising, and we thought they probably were flawed at the time because it showed that not only did you get dumber as a result of talking to strangers online about controversial issues, but also it polarized and it made your opinion more extreme. So at that time, that was my master's study. We were like, well, that's garbage. I better put that right into the filing bin. I guess I did something wrong. Like maybe it's an artifact of the study. But so I was continuing sort of looking at like trying to think through or trying to understand like what people could do together intellectually in online spaces at that time, really just looking at chat rooms, chat spaces. And I was getting super frustrated because if you could see statistical differences here and there, right? But if you opened up the transcript and looked, it was very obvious that people hated what they were doing. They were totally unenthused. Like there was total disengagement. So imagine that you're trying to understand what people are capable of. And what you're looking at is like the stupidest arrangement possible that makes everyone disengaged. And so I was really frustrated. And one of my professors, James Paul G, right? So he was running a book group I was in, and he was not my main advisor at that time. I was over in cognitive science. He was over in literacy studies. And I went to him and I was like, I'm really struggling because I want to study this thing, but every time I try to capture it in the lab, I'm not able to capture it. And he's like, that's because you need to get out of the lab. You need to go look at places where people are actually there voluntarily, where they're invested, and where sort of like engagement's already taken care of, and then study what people are doing. So at that time, he was writing the book on that first book, what games have to teach us about learning and literacy, I think
Hmm.
is the title. So he said, okay, I'll take you on as a student, and you need to pivot over to studying virtual worlds and games. And you got to remember, like, I had no television. My idea of fun was to go to bed with, like, Proust by myself in my little sad, little austere corner because that was sort of my thing. I was like a little hermit. And so I thought, well, but there's one thing, Rachel, and that is that humility and the ability to actually take advice and feedback from people who I know are smarter than me has always been a huge benefit in my life. And so when Jim recommended this, I was like, you're bananas. I don't want to do this, and I'm going to try it. So I did, and at that time, Lineage One, which was a NC Soft game, primarily in Korea. There were North American servers, but it was the biggest global online game title at the time. People were still playing EverQuest, etc., Ultima Online. But this was the big, big, big title with the biggest population. So I downloaded it on my little lame computer and I logged in. I got my avatar stuck between two trees that weren't even like actual trees you could navigate. And I just ping ponged back and forth for a couple days, like, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? In like the tutorial section. That's how bad I was at games. But I started seeing what people were doing and I was absolutely baffled. I could not believe the level of complexity of problem solving people were willing to engage in. I'm over there like bribing people with extra credit or money, trying to get them to do like these problems that aren't that hard together, that were like collaborative problems. Then you go into games and they're doing these crazy, crazy coordinations. So I shifted to games and I never looked back. In fact, I will say at the first couple years, I was like, I felt like an imposter and I gamed the shit out of that stuff. Like my longest game session was 30 hours. I played 15 months straight. I literally lived in that game. I did a full scale ethnography in a virtual space and it was incredible. And I learned so much. And the people, I ended up actually not studying the game. It was really the community I was studying, which were to this day the most amazing individuals I've met. I'm truly humbled. But it's funny, I remember the highest compliment I ever got because at that time, games weren't a thing. People were like, you had a career until this moment and now you're dead in the water because no one will touch this stuff. And there weren't a lot of women. There was like TL Taylor and, Celia Pierce. Um, there were a few other sort of luminary females that were just, but only a handful. It was like 95% dudes, mostly with beards, mostly white. So I remember I felt like I had finally made it when I gave a presentation at no, it was some games conference. It was Serious Games run by Ben Sawyer in DC. And some dude came up to me after my talk and said, in this haughty voice, you seem to really be invested in games. And I was like, okay. And he said, some might say too invested, and put his little pinky on his chin. And I was like, thank you. And I walked out like kind of strutting with some swagger, like, bitches, someone just mistook me for a gamer, people. Woo! I made it, right? But that's kind of how I got in. It was not because of love of games whatsoever, but it was because just academic, if you look at it from a cognitive perspective of reasoning and problem solving, that is where it was happening. And, from there, it just, kind of evolved. I think the entire field evolved. And I was really lucky enough to kind of hit it at the right time when there wasn't a lot written, and it was sort of like, you hit the wave right at the right time, where sort of my career tracked quite a bit with the growth of games research, games studies, games dev, and higher ed. Yeah, sorry, that was long-winded.
Oh, it was a lovely story.
It's funny, at that time there isn't a lot out there on learning
Yeah.
in games, especially online games, and so you can sort of be like, I do cognition in online worlds, right? Well, now, like, you're like, okay, what do you actually specifically do? Because the field now is very big, but at the time there was like nobody. So it was like, I do online worlds and cognition. Well, that's amazing. That's Constance. And then, 10 years later, you're like, you start to refine and narrow because you have more colleagues in the field. And then that's what happens when it goes well, right? So you start to being able to not feel like you have to master all of it. Now you get to start diving into the areas that you really want to dig more deeply into, which is great.
Absolutely. It's the best part of the career. I told this story the other day when
Yeah.
I pitched my PhD. I said, I want to look at games and adaptive functioning. And they were like, cool, yeah, that's too much. We're not going to do that. And I was like, okay. And I was like, games and the social impact of games. They're like, keep going. And I'm like, right, okay.
Huge.
Games and social skills. There we are. We found it. We found it. But games and social impact is like games and friendship, games and social skills, games and social anxiety. Like there's so
Yes.
many parts to it now.
Yes. 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 And honestly, that conversation, though, I have that conversation with my dissertation students all the time. I
Yeah.
have one right now that's like, I'm going to do social emotional skills and mentoring and games. And I was like, keep
You're
going.
not. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
huge. And
Yeah.
now we're down to
That's
one
it.
narrow thing, which is dysregulation versus self-regulation, tilt, right?
There you go.
Tilt and mentoring and games.
Yeah.
It's still going to have to be narrowed. But that's
Yeah.
what it means when a field develops, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the good news. It's
Yeah.
you get to focus more, and your colleagues get to study all the other ones. It's
They,
great.
yeah. Then you get to know the people who do all the other things and then
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
together once a year at a conference and then share your
Yeah.
knowledge. You don't have to know it all.
Yeah.
You just get your little piece of
Yeah.
the pie. Um,
That's right.
so tell me then, now you're in California. I know
Mm.
you are living the beach surfing life because I came to see you last year and it was wonderful. Um,
Because
how
we
did
went and beach.
we did go to the beach? How did that
Yeah.
transition?
So there I am. I'm not tenured. I just had my second baby. I've got some MacArthur money and I had a fellowship with the Spencer National Academies of Education. And I'm looking at games and they're funding me doing these experimental studies. And I just get asked, I get tapped to take this, to consider this job in DC in the, Office of Science and Technology Policy. And Rachel, I thought it was like some sort of weird office in like NSF or Department of Ed. I didn't, I had been funded by private entities. I knew about NSF. I had done some graduate work on NSF dollars, but wasn't really paying attention. And of course, I was raised like, any opportunity, you try to walk through the door and your job is to make them offer it. So you have the chance to say yes or no. So I went not intending to do this. I have tenure, I have babies, right? Like little babies. They're not weaned yet. Um, so I go and I get in a cab and then I get out of the cab and I'm literally at the White House. And I'm like, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? And I go in and I'm just like, I have no clue what's happening right now. And I go in and I meet with Tom Khalil, who, if you don't know who he is like an incredible DC insider who gets stuff to happen, who's like focused entirely on innovation. He's an incredible person. And I have like this 15-minute meeting with him where he says, he kind of asked me some questions. Oh, no, he had asked me to prepare a brief that was if you could basically sort of develop an entire set of initiatives and policies around games for the country, what would they be? And I was like, how many pages do I get for this? And he was
So
like,
many.
give me two.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I gave him more like seven. And I was just like, boom, 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 boom. Library should look like Apple Genius bars. Boom. I was just like, I just went bananas. I had a field day with this. So I walk in, I slide in my document, he sort of thumbs through it, sets it aside, gives me this discussion about this very basic discussion about how to get things done in DC. And it was, to this day, it was one of the most remarkable discussions. He was like, you have ideas. Ideas are nice. You also need resources to get ideas done. Now, people think that resources are the problem. Resources are rarely the problem. If you have a good idea, resources will come. The issue is always people. And I was like, people that don't want you to do it. And he was like, no, you need, for an idea, you need people who are willing, or a person who is willing to own that idea and like put their teeth into it and move it forward. But if you have an idea and you have someone to own that idea and make it theirs and really like, own it and advocate for it, then resources are rarely the problem. And also permissions. He said, and permissions, of course, come next. And I walked out with like this like diagram of 4 circles. I was like, this is my lesson in policy. Okay.
That's
And
awesome.
then I'm leaving and he's like, well, so he looks at the gentleman I'm with and he says, well, start her paperwork for like security clearances. And I'm walking out and I was like, I didn't say yes to any of this, did I? And the guy, I'm like, did I just get Scooby Dooed into something? Did I just say yes? And he was like, kinda. So I go home and I'm fretting and I'm fretting and I'm like, I've got tenure, I've got this center. By this time, Kurt and I are running a center, the Games Learning and Society Center. There's like 7 faculty all involved. We've got lots of we've got like lots of graduate students, undergraduate interns. It's getting big, right? We're starting to hire full-time designers. We've got multiple strands of money in. It's getting bigger and bigger. And I call my husband and I get outside and I call my husband. He's like, hey, honey, how's it going? And I'm like, well, and he's like, you said yes, didn't you? And I'm like, I didn't, but somehow I think I did. So I just decided to take it, which was bananas. And I did that for a year. I got tenure while I was in the White House, which was a really strange personal kind of moment because suddenly I realized, in academics, if 10 people read your paper, people think you're a hero. Um, in policy, there's this capacity to get so much done to really have a big impact. And so that was interesting. But when I came back from DC, it took me a while to, the White House kind of broke me in a certain way. Well, I mean, first off, you don't get to just retire. I mean, I resigned because I needed to get back to my center, my marriage, my kids. Um, but when there's no one to take over your portfolio, I was actually doing 2 jobs. So I was still going to DC about twice a month. And I was full-time faculty. And so I realized the only way for me to actually be able to step away from those responsibilities without having everything we've done fall apart is to find my successor. So I found Mark Delora, and he was incredible. So, ginned up some funding for him, ginned up, got him through security and was like, handed him over with a bow on top saying, here you go. Here's a great policy analyst list for you. And he just knocked it out of the park. But, our center had gotten by that it was, after the White House, it just exploded. It got bigger and bigger. Um, to the point where we had like 35 master's and PhD students. We had 17 full-time designers. We were running a huge kind of empire. And I'll be very honest with you. At some point, my husband and I looked at each other and we were just like, I don't think this is making us happy. I mean, you know what this is like raising enough money. And we were operating across academics and a non-for-profit because the university wouldn't hire game designers. It was so big and it was hard, you're like managing all these people. And next thing you know, you're not really doing any of the studies you're funded to do. Other postdocs and students do it for you. And I think both of us had a Lukenbach, Texas moment, right? Where we look at each other and we're like, maybe something simpler might actually bring some joy back into our work and take some of the pressure off of us because it was a lot. And UCI had come to us and were interested in us moving. And at that time, we had agreed when I came back from White House that we wouldn't. They gave us a retention offer, and we agreed we would not. We would not consider any other offers. And finally, after 3 years, that expired. UCI was still kind of headhunting us, and we thought, well, we have some friends out there, fabulous colleagues, Minnie Ito, Rebecca Black, Bill Tomlinson, some fabulous people. So we thought, well, we should at least go and look and see. And then we came out and we were just like, this place is amazing. Like, I don't have to explain. At that point, I was still at the beginning of every talk, I had to explain. I had to acknowledge the concerns about games and explain I am not a misogynist. I am not a violent person. I'm not pro addiction. I simply want us to actually take seriously the kinds of practices and intellectual work that people are doing. And I think games are a really powerful medium. And I don't think they're simply first person shooters and other kinds of titles people oftentimes stereotype games as. You get to UCI and leadership's like, da 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 da, got all that. We don't need to know, right? Just go to your research. And I was like, I don't have to give the preamble. This is amazing. And then, like, we don't have a football team here. We've got an esports team and they are like champions. And it's this full professional theme. They have physical therapists, they've got training, they've got tutors, they do service. It is a badass program. And I just got here and I was like, this is the most amazing campus I've ever seen for doing what we do. They had a games major that was one of the earliest games majors. And so we just kind of fell in love. And it was kind of risky, but we thought, you know what? This could be just a really nice way for us to be able to resize things a bit and also be in a space where, being in a place where you're the only games people, right? If it was games in Wisconsin, we were probably at least aware, if not involved in it. And being in a place, how do I put this? Being isolated and surrounded by people who either work for you only or are your students does not make you a better scholar. It does not make me a smarter person. You know what makes me a smarter person? Working with people who know things I don't know and actually people I don't agree with and debating and arguing and having conversations. That makes me a smarter person, right? I have to sharpen my intellectual blade against something else besides my own internal mind. So we just decided to move and never looked back, right? It was a great move for us. And it not only allowed us to sort of resize and go back to sort of the parts of our jobs that we loved, but it also put us in a context that we have undergraduates here. We were having to hire full-time designers because there was no games program at UW. But here we have this thriving game. So if we want to make games or AR, VR, any kind of applications, we have undergraduates that are incredibly talented that are chomping at the bit to have some design projects. So it just really all worked out for us. So it wasn't just the beach, although I will say the beach and the quality of life are certainly real. And that's been great. It's been great for our whole family. But the campus itself, it's just so young and it's so prone towards saying, well, why shouldn't we try something instead of, 150-year university? I loved UW and they were so good to us, but there was still this feeling like I always had to sort of justify why we were studying games as a medium. But we're in Silicon Valley down here. No one needs the explanation. It's a major part of our economy. So that has shifted a lot of, I don't know, the general sort of feeling of doing games.
I love that you point out you don't have to do the preamble because I also remember when I hit that moment in my career and it felt not only
Yeah.
validating, but so freeing that you don't have to
Yeah,
have that
right.
bit at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, right. But you don't have to say, games are an important medium. And they're not just, it's not just like some sort of, kind of Trojan horse for violence and misogyny, guys. It's really kind of, there are lots of games out there, not just the ones that scare you. Yeah, those days have changed. And I should also say, total shout out to the entire industry of indie scene. Like the indie scene has shifted fundamentally how games are made, what games are made, and how we think about games because they are the massive diversity, the long tail of games that have proven that games are not simply blockbuster, huge optic, same sort of titles of, Madden, NBA 2K, and, Call of Duty, all of which are great games, but still seem to be kind of narrow, right? So, yeah, it's just been fantastic. We're still in the golden age of games, and that's really exciting.
It is, especially with indies. Like it's become so much easier to make them. It's become so much more
Yeah.
affordable to make them with smaller teams. I have three small children, so really the only games I play these days are indies because they have to have an endpoint. I have to be able to finish it, or I'm not gonna enjoy
Yeah.
it. Like
Yeah.
Unpacking and Thirsty Suitors and Venba and all these games have come out in the last few years that have just been absolutely
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah,
I don't
you're
know.
absolutely right, right? And now you can have like snack size games. You can have
Yeah.
games that don't require like Lineage originally. I had to stop playing MMOs because I just didn't have the time. I don't have the 20, 30 hours a week to actually be good at them. And who wants to play a game that you're kind of sucky at, right? I mean, those games required about 3 to 4 hours minimum. Sit down and play that long to simply have a satisfying kind of dungeon crawl or siege or whatever you want. And now you have games all different shapes and sizes. You have games that are very niche and for particular audiences across all different platforms. I mean, it's also, it's not just that game design platforms like Unity and now Unreal Blueprints have come out, which have absolutely, absolutely made this possible. But it's also that you have distribution channels where game makers can get their games to audiences in a way that just wasn't possible when I first started in the games field. And so that's really shifted everything now. And now games are kind of, there was also the rise of mobile back in like 2008, 2010. So now, the gameplay audience is massive and diverse. Almost everybody plays something on their phone, even your grandmama, even your mama is playing something on their phone when they're
Wordle.
bored, right? Or
They're
when they
playing
just
Wordle.
need, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Wordle is a great one.
Yeah.
So I just feel like our general literacy is now higher as a nation. That doesn't mean that we don't still have some public scares around games, but
Yeah.
especially post COVID, I think that I know that right now we're kind of in a winter in the industry. But during COVID, I think that at least for the American public, people started to see that, while games may be no replacement for real world interactions and hobbies, etc., but they can sit in that ecosystem of a person's, every day in a way that's really healthy, that you actually, interacting and being with people online together in a game actually is meaningful. It's not just barren play. So that's, it's been great for people to finally wake up to the fact that, like, oh, yeah. So it turns out that, like, hanging out with your friends on a Friday night on, Valorant is not such a bad thing.
Yeah, it has value. Absolutely. I think COVID did help with that exponentially. There was
Yeah.
a article that came out in Good Housekeeping during COVID at the beginning, like saying why it's good to play games with your
What?
children, and I almost died.
Hello?
I know.
In Good Housekeeping. Oh my
Yes.
God. Oh my God. I'm
That's what I'm
so
saying.
happy.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Yes.
No longer do I have to put on my pearls and dress like a mama and go out places
No,
going, really, ladies, it's okay. If your kids game, it's
that's
okay.
it.
Maybe you could know what they play. Maybe you could find a game yourself. Maybe some
Yeah,
leisure and playtime for yourself would be kind of nice, right?
maybe. I
Yeah,
mean, it's a
that's a
bold
gift.
idea, but they are starting
It
to
is a
do.
bold idea.
Yeah. We are running out of time, sadly. I could talk
Mm.
to you forever, but I do
I
want
could
to
talk
leave.
to you
I
forever.
know. I want to leave you with one question, which I ask everyone, which is, um, if I had the joy of talking to you again 10 years from now, what would you hope we are saying about your most recent save?
Oh, well, right now I'm trying to transfer the sort of, I'm trying to reposition over toward writing books, a textbook and a personal book. And I'll tell you what I hope I'll be doing is more around social connectedness and trust. And I'm very interested right now in sort of joint flow states and games. I'm very interested in what are the limits of online technologies and shared online game spaces for fomenting, for generating genuine feelings of connectedness and trust, communities of belonging. More the positive side. You know, you and I both share some work over in like what tilt and toxicity and hate and harassment and even like white supremacy and extremism look like in these spaces, but I'm very interested in how do you create games that actually, amplify that sort of social connectedness and amplify the things that actually make us whole and connect us to each other. And, there's a lot of writing about how embodiment and in-person interaction are the bedrock for some of that to happen. But I'm very curious about like what are the give and takes there. And I hope that my work will shift a bit more toward that. But I don't plan on giving up games anytime soon. This sort of interaction, this sort of intersection between computation and art to me is always just really provocative. I really feel privileged to be in that space where it's sort of right there at the intersection. And looking at what the social and personal kind of consequences are is just sort of my life's work. Maybe, and to go back to the question of how I got into games, maybe it's just that, sort of honoring the fact that play is our fundamental form of exploration and learning in the world. It's also a fundamental form of community formation. And so to me, games are just sort of a subset of that. They're a place that sort of holds still in a certain way. The context can be defined so you can study it there. I don't see me giving that up anytime soon. There's so much I don't know about it yet. I also will say right now, I think there are pockets of gameplay and gamers, that have not actually gotten their fair say or representation in how the public thinks about gaming. And I think that we still have a lot of work to do to sort of give that some of its fair due.
I want to read your books. I don't teach, but I would use your textbook, even if it's not even relevant to the class that I'm teaching, and be like, read this.
We're teaching a stat course, but
We
we're
are
going to read a book
now.
on games and
Yeah.
society. And
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
that's
Well,
great.
thank you very
Yeah.
much for sharing your story with us
Yeah.
today and sharing your time with us.
It is always good to talk to you, Rachel. I always get smarter when I talk to you.
This is why we like, you got to hang out with people that are from a different area of
Mm,
expertise so we can all leave with a little new knowledge.
no
That's
kidding.
it.
I mean,
The sweet spot.
what's more interesting than that, right?
I
It's
agree.
true.
I agree.
Thank you for having me.
Oh,
It's an
thank you for
honor.
coming. This podcast was produced by Zeitgeist, a multimedia content production studio that focuses on the intersection of games, science, and pop culture, created by Rachel Cowart. And if you would like more Psychgeist content, you can find me on YouTube at Psychgeist, Psychgeist. And I also have a mostly monthly newsletter on Substack where you can find if you search for the same name. Until next time, be excellent to each other and always cite your sources.